In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we have watched borrowings from classic productions and attempts to outdo what rivals did play out over and over again. Some of these both elevated the movies and were embraced by fans. Others turned out to be both copies and disasters. Let's start with one of the best examples, Thanos. The MCU's Mad Titan was built to land the way Darth Vader did, and the Russo brothers never hit it. Marvel had a problem on paper. The comic version of Thanos is a villain literally in love with the personification of death, a motivation that does not translate cleanly to a mainstream audience. So when it came time to put him on screen, Kevin Feige pointed directly at Vader as the benchmark, a villain who carried weight, gravity, and a motivation audiences could understand and even partly sympathize with. Vader was not just a man in armor. He was a fallen idealist who believed his choices were saving the people he loved. Marvel rebuilt Thanos around that same logic. The MCU rewrote him as a man with a brutal but coherent philosophy, balancing the universe through sacrifice, including the sacrifice of those closest to him. Audiences were not just supposed to fear him, they were supposed to almost understand him, the same way Vader's quiet menace was paired with the tragedy of a father who lost his way. Josh Brolin was directed to play him low, slow, deliberate, in the same register James Earl Jones used for decades. Fans welcomed the homage because Marvel had spent 10 years building toward a villain who could carry that mythic weight.
Pretty, isn't it? Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Captain Marvel. The Superman comparison started long before the movie came out. Marvel's marketing positioned Carol Danvers as the strongest hero they had ever introduced, the savior of the universe, the one who would lead the next generation. That framing alone is the Superman framing. Superman has been DC's mythic, godlike, hope of the world figure since 1938, and Marvel essentially asked audiences to receive Carol the same way. The way she was woven into the MCU made it worse. She was kept off screen for the entire Infinity War crisis, then introduced as the late arriving solution, the cosmic outsider who lands and changes everything. That is the Superman archetype almost word for word, the god who descends from above to save a world that could not save itself. Superman works because Clark Kent has Kansas, the Kents, Lois, and a moral center built over 8 decades. Carol was asked to land with that same mythic weight in a single movie. Reddit and film Twitter started calling her Marvel's Superman as both compliment and critique. The complaint was the framing itself. Marvel introduced her with the iconography of a DC archetype instead of building her own. The Marvels in 2023 underperformed, partly because the franchise never softened that first impression. Before we move on to the next copycat, subscribing and dropping a like would mean a lot in helping me grow the channel, and you can throw your hype points on this video to help push it out. Let's continue with a copycat everyone thinks of and actually loved, Doctor Strange's mirror dimension sequences. When Scott Derrickson's Doctor Strange hit theaters in 2016, the comparison was immediate. Christopher Nolan's Inception in 2010 had introduced mainstream audiences to the idea of cities as malleable architecture, folding, twisting, rearranging themselves like origami. That image became one of the defining visual ideas of the decade. 6 years later, Doctor Strange built its entire visual identity around the same concept and did not pretend otherwise. The structural borrowing is just as clear. Inception used a protagonist learning the rules of a hidden reality from an experienced mentor. Doctor Strange used the exact same setup, with the Ancient One guiding Strange into the mystical world. The mentor explaining impossible physics to a curious newcomer is a Nolan template, and Marvel adopted it without rewriting it. What separates Doctor Strange from a lazy knockoff is that Marvel leaned into the comparison and pushed past it. Inception treated its folded cities as a thought experiment about memory and guilt. Doctor Strange repurposed that vocabulary as a stage for combat between sorcerers. Fans embraced it because Derrickson found a use for Inception's ideas Nolan himself never explored.
What is this place?
The mirror dimension, where I'm in control.
Fantastic Four First Steps. The 2025 Fantastic Four reboot walked into a problem 20 years in the making. Back in 2004, Brad Bird released The Incredibles, a Pixar movie about a family of 4 superheroes living in a retro-futuristic 1960s world. Bird has always claimed the similarities to Marvel's first family were coincidence, but the producers of the 2005 Fantastic Four movie were shaken enough to rework Sue Storm's powers in response. Pixar had effectively defined the cinematic Fantastic Four before Marvel ever got there. The 2025 reboot did not fight that legacy, it embraced it. Marvel set the movie in the same retro-futuristic 1960s aesthetic, framed the team as a domestic family unit, and leaned into the same warm, jazzy tone The Incredibles popularized. Then comes the twist fans noticed within hours of release. Michael Giacchino, the composer who scored The Incredibles in 2004, also scored First Steps in 2025. The same composer scored the same world twice. Time magazine ran a piece arguing no live-action Fantastic Four movie has lived up to The Incredibles. Bird's film sits at 97% on Rotten Tomatoes, First Steps at 86. Pixar made the definitive Fantastic Four movie in 2004, and Marvel spent 2 decades catching up. WandaVision? WandaVision was pitched as Marvel's strangest experiment, and the reason it worked is that it did not try to hide what it was copying. The premise itself was the borrowing. Marvel announced upfront that the show would be structured as a tour through American sitcom history, with each episode adopting the visual language and conventions of a different decade. That alone could have been a gimmick. What made it land was that the show treated those formats as emotional architecture, not as decoration. The presentation went deep. The show committed fully to each era it referenced, from the 4-camera black and white setup of the 1960s to the warmer single-camera intimacy of 2010s sitcoms. Each opening title sequence was rebuilt from scratch in the visual idiom of its source decade. The Agatha reveal song was written in the style of actual jingle composers from each era.
Who's been messing up everything? It's been Agatha all along.
Charted on Billboard, and won an Emmy. Fans treated it as a love letter rather than theft. The consensus online was that WandaVision used American sitcom history as a way to externalize Wanda's grief, with each format standing in for a stage of her denial. That is the difference between copying a format and turning it into a storytelling tool. Ikaris. Ikaris is the MCU's most openly called out Superman analog, and it begins with how he was framed for audiences. The marketing introduced him as the most powerful Eternal, the team's leader, the immovable, godlike figure the rest of the group looked up to. That is the Superman framing almost exactly. DC has positioned Superman as the moral and physical center of its team for nearly a century, and Marvel chose to build Ikaris on the same template. The script even lampshades it directly. Phastos' young son asks Ikaris if he is the superhero from television, the one with the cape.
That's Superman! I saw him on TV. He was in London fighting a monster. You were with the cape and you were shooting laser beams out of your eye.
I don't wear a cape.
Ikaris' only comeback is that he does not wear a cape. Marvel wrote the joke in because they knew audiences would make the connection. Director Chloe Zhao openly cited Zack Snyder's Superman as her tonal reference. Where fans turned on the introduction is that Ikaris was framed with all of Superman's mythic gravity, but none of the texture that earns it. Marvel asked audiences to receive him as a legendary protector with no Smallville, no Lois, and no decades of context. Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Captain America: The Winter Soldier in 2014 was openly pitched by the Russo brothers as a 1970s paranoid political thriller in superhero clothing. Their two most cited references were 3 Days of the Condor and All the President's Men, conspiracy films about institutions rotting from the inside. The Russos told Marvel they wanted Captain America to feel like a Robert Redford movie, and Marvel responded by literally hiring Robert Redford to play Alexander Pierce. The whole framing was lifted from that subgenre. Cap was repositioned as a man out of time inside a corrupted institution, the same lonely whistleblower archetype Redford himself had played decades earlier. Fans embraced it because Winter Soldier was the first MCU movie that could stand outside the superhero genre. Thor: Love and Thunder. Thor: Love and Thunder had a brutal problem. It was trying to recreate the exact framing of Thor Ragnarok, released 5 years earlier by the same director, and the mimicry showed at every level. Marvel positioned the movie as another irreverent Waititi cosmic comedy, leaning on the same color palette, the same neon synthwave marketing, the same promise of a quirky Thor reinvention. Ragnarok had earned that framing because it was the first time anyone had presented Thor that way. Love and Thunder inherited the framing without earning it. The structural echoes were everywhere. Both movies were sold as a hero rediscovering himself through a cosmic quest. Both centered him with a makeshift team. Both leaned on a prestige actor as the visually distinct villain, and the second attempt felt like a parody of the first. Guardians of the Galaxy. James Gunn did not hide his Star Wars references when he made Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014. The whole movie was framed as Marvel's answer to the space opera adventure Lucasfilm had defined. Peter Quill was framed as the modern Han Solo, an outlaw with charm and a heart he tries to hide. Rocket and Groot were positioned as his Han and Chewie pairing. The Milano was sold as a junker hero ship in the Millennium Falcon mold. The whole architecture was lifted from a vocabulary Lucas codified in 1977. Fans embraced it because Gunn layered something Star Wars never had, a needle-drop soundtrack of 70s pop songs that turned space opera into a family mixtape. Thor: The Dark World. Thor: The Dark World from 2013 sits at the bottom of most MCU rankings because it was framed as Marvel's answer to Lord of the Rings without earning any of the mythic weight Peter Jackson's trilogy had built. Marvel marketed it as a darker, more serious Asgardian fantasy. Leaning on the high fantasy iconography Jackson had codified a decade earlier, ancient enemies returning after thousands of years, and a tone of cosmic seriousness. The framing matched everything Lord of the Rings had defined. The Dark Elves were positioned as an ancient, evil race awakened from slumber. The Aether was set up as a mystical, corrupting object in the One Ring tradition. Fans called it Marvel's Asgardian Lord of the Rings knockoff. Chris Hemsworth has said he nearly quit the role after making it. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop a like and use your hype points, and subscribe and turn on notifications to get instantly notified about the next videos. See you in the next videos!